distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the audience, and I welcome you to the second day of Enyigbeti 2014. The first session for the day, as you've all heard, is a very topical issue given where we are in the country today. It's talking about managing the transition from public sector to the private sector managed electricity industry. We will be having, I believe, a lead paper that will be delivered by by former President Saakashvili. We will be listening to a paper from him, and then we'll have a number of panelists from different perspectives. It has been said that privatization is 99% politics and 1% economics. You might actually change that equation to 99.99% politics and 0.01% economics, and you probably would be also correct. It speaks to the fact that essentially privatizing the power industry effectively involves moving the levers of control of a major sector of the economy from the public sector to the private sector, and there are always vested interests on both sides of the equation, making sure that it doesn't happen, or that if it's going to happen, it happens very slowly. And on the other hand, you have those that want it to happen as quickly as possible, and there's always tension between these two. So today, we have a panel that I believe will speak to all sides of the spectrum. On my immediate right, we have one of the leading lights of the labor movement in the country, and as we all know, the labor movement is a major factor in how these things happen, or sometimes even they don't happen at all. We also have somebody from the World Bank, our favorite punch bag in Nigeria, the Bretton Woods people who tell us everything to do. We'll also hear his perspective, Eric. And then someone on my immediate left, Ms. Oshibodu, who we all know, and is a major player in the movement of those levers from the public to the private sector. And perhaps she'll tell us a little bit about how much of a wonderful experience it was for her. And then finally, on the side of the Lagos State government, you have Mr. Taufik Tijani, who is Commissioner for Mineral Resources and Energy in Lagos State, and will give us the perspective of those who are on the receiving end of taking care of the people who are clamoring for better quality service. On that note, I welcome all of you once again, and I'll just ask Mr. Saakashvili to please proceed.
Yes, we saw very acutely what kind of problem Nigeria is facing, for all these last 2 days that I'm here. And our problem was of the similar magnitude. Georgia had even less prospects because we didn't have and don't have any significant quantities of oil and gas. So government couldn't supply 80% of the time the population with electricity. The most popular, the most widespread way to express protest against the government was for people to close streets, to burn tires, to revolt, to go to electricity distribution stations and there to shout and scream at them and throw stones sometimes. The most widespread theft in Georgia was theft of diesel generators from the balconies and or even from inside the buildings. And actually this was, people were revolting because obviously Soviet times at least there was electricity, and then it was post-Soviet period, and suddenly generation that grew up more or less in electricity and even central heating, they stayed without it. So the way how we started to tackle it, and of course it caused problem with water supply, with many other issues. Industrial output was dramatically down. Georgia was world champion in terms of reduction of the GDP in the 90s. We had in several years falling of GDP by 75%. So in that respect, we were really in very, very dire situation. And so what happened was that we took several steps. The first major step was, of course, to eradicate corruption. The former energy minister was arrested for corruption. There were a number of other people arrested. It was not only just corruption, it was organized crime that was in that system. For instance, head of Tbilisi Utility Company was assassinated for trying to, squeeze out mafia from the system prior to my government when it took over, so we also investigate that crime. And actually what we did is to, first of all, go after corrupt officials, and the main scheme was that electricity was being produced by our hydropower plants, but it was sold through offshore to Russia and Turkey. Money was pocketed by corrupt officials, and they would not, and it would not, certainly the electricity would not be delivered, and money would, certainly from sale of electricity also would not be delivered. So what we did is we first of all got rid of this scheme. We also went to privatize all our hydropower stations. Now in Georgia, we had this thing which many countries have, that people consider like that we had this list of strategic assets. So there would be a long list of strategic assets, including all the energy objects. And once the asset was deemed strategic, you were not allowed to, obviously, to sell it. But what it really meant that people didn't benefit from this asset. There were a number of corrupt government officials, and we had long strategic assets. We had hydropower plants, we had, of course, railway and factories related to railway. We had a number of things like, like gold mines. So if you were, gold mine was government asset, but who benefited gold mine? The governor of that region and minister of that field, were from time to time discovered with large stocks of golden, gold, of pure gold at their homes. From time to time, there would be scandal. But otherwise, and the same thing would be with the hydropower and electricity transmission lines. So we privatized them all, and we opened market for investment. We liberalized the tariffs. We certainly had an Energy Regulatory Commission that made sure that tariffs provided by private companies were not speculative. But of course, margin was left for private companies to be profitable. But the other important element was that we also built electricity lines. It was private-public partnership in all directions, to Turkey, which is energy hungry, obviously, through Armenia to Iran, also to Azerbaijan, and also obviously we have line to Russia. And with all these, lines, new markets, also Turkey, by the way, started to liberalize its market because it needed to get energy. We achieved that now that Georgia has this hydropower potential. We were utilizing only 13 to 14% of it. Now with all new construction, we're going to 30%, but we have another 70% to go. So and this is not only just the population is supplied with electricity, but also what is very important that we have, this is one of the biggest potential for economic growth and FDI, is hydropower sector. Now the other thing we did is that we could exchange with every neighbor. It's very important not to give anybody monopoly on your supply. Obviously, our electricity comes from two sources, from gas-powered stations or hydropower. Hydropower, most of it, but you need gas-powered turbines because there are peak times. Obviously, in winter and summer, there are fluctuations, and that's how we do it. But also, because there are fluctuations, say, we have surplus energy in summer, we have lack of energy in winter, but whilst, for instance, Iran has enough energy to give us in winter, if you have lines to exchange with them. Or the same concerns Turkey. So, but the main thing that there was a situation until our government that Russia was the only supplier of gas. And gas is this power tool for Russia, which is actively utilizing. also in Eastern Europe. When it's the sole supplier, it's very easy to blackmail the countries. But as soon as we made good lines with Azerbaijan through new pipeline that we built, as soon as we also managed to connect ourselves with Iran on a standby if we had needed to, also through Azerbaijan and Armenia, actually Russia discovered that it's no longer a sole supplier. We still provide for transit. There is a transit through Georgia territory of Russian gas to Armenia, but as a result, Georgia gets 20% of what Armenia gets for transit price. But basically, the rest we buy. When we buy it at a lower price, say Armenia receives gas only from Russia, or until recently received only from Russia. Armenia was paying twice as much as Georgia, that was closer to Russia on the way to Armenia. Why? Because Georgia had other sources of supply. So you never want to depend upon one supplier, because that gives it considerable leverage to exert pressure and to push you for undesirable results. So it was a combination of liberalization of the market. It was a combination of course, killing of corruption, which is connected, by the way, with liberalization and privatization. It was a combination of inter-regional ties in all different directions. And obviously it was also connected with political will to administer better, to get much more people involved in, much qualified people in doing administration of all these new lines. In a way, to sum up, Georgia has become, from being almost importer of most of its electricity and 100% of gas, net exporter of electricity, and obviously with gas, we have very diversified supply and long-term contracts at considerably lower prices than most of our other neighbors and partners. So that's what we achieved in our field, and needless to say, when I was head of Tbilisi government, and I was listening yesterday to Governor here, and when he mentioned number of streets that they lit up in Lagos, and I perfectly can understand Batatunde Raji Pachala for what he's saying, because I was head of local government of my capital. It's a place it's smaller than Lagos, 1.5 million people. And I can tell you that, it was a big trouble when we had dark streets. When I drove from the way to the airport, one thing I immediately noticed, buildings are dark. No window was lit up. And it's very depressing. And as a result, if you come today to my capital or to many other places in Georgia, they are overlit. They are one of the best lit places in the world. Well, because hydro is also cheaper. But we are doing it sometimes on purpose. Sometimes people were complaining they could sleep at night because too much light coming from the windows. But that's what really makes us to compensate for all these years of darkness, which was a very depressive period for my nation. And so I'm looking forward to the fact that this will be the same here once you tackle most of the issues that you have, obviously, in this amazing country of Nigeria. Thank you.
But before we let you go, I'd like you to please say something about how you managed labor and the labor unions in Georgia.
We were blessed by the fact that actually we had old Soviet labor unions that were already disintegrating and weak, and new didn't emerge. But we had some so-called energy unions still, which was, from time to time blackmailing the government. But because so much corruption and they were connected to mafia, that we dealt with it through law enforcement, and then the people were desperate. They wanted to get electricity, and government, when they saw that when government was honest, was not stealing money, was genuinely interested in fixing the problems, nobody else could block it. I mean, that's because then people were on the side of the government. They saw the results. So it more or less, this blackmail was sidelined.
So it's a case of where the case for privatization made itself, and everybody accepted that.
Obviously, they were shouting, some people, that it's, we are giving up strategic reserves, but we exposed so many corrupt bureaucrats that were benefiting from it, but people didn't have any more impression that they were giving up something of their own, because in reality, they weren't getting anything from the fact that their government or their state-owned this or that. This was basically owned by bureaucrats and plutocrats of that government, but not by the people.
I think from my own side, relating to what I just heard, basically people were already fed up and wanted the change, and so they were ready to support the change. I believe maybe there's a slight difference with us in Nigeria. It is true that we're already fed up and wanted the change, but I don't think all of us, had enough information in terms of our reality to know that the change, what it entails, will be something that will take a lot from us. So as a practitioner on the field, what we saw was that everybody expected that once you've privatized, literally by the next day, everybody has electricity. And so 1 week after, you had a lot of noise in the newspapers. People were already frustrated and impatient, saying, what has changed? We have not seen more power. The other side also was that people did not fully know the reality of our own situation in Nigeria. I just want to bring out some examples that typically when I mention it, people are shocked. One example is when I tell people that to provide power for Nigeria 24/7, if you use the normal international rule of thumb, using population and the population size, which basically says for 1 million people, you need 1,000 megawatts. So if we're 150 million, we need 150,000 megawatts. And in Nigeria today, we fluctuate between 2,500. I've seen 2,400 since I joined the sector. And maybe peak level 4,500. So the reality is, if you are going to 150 or even 100,000 megawatts and you are just at ground zero, which is 2,000, 3,000, is a long haul. But most people do not see that reality and do not believe that reality exists. The second fallacy is that people do not realize that infrastructure is not power. So politicians have pulled the wool over our eyes for a long time, go to locations during their political campaign and say, I'm giving you transformer. And once people get transformer, they believe they have power. Transformer facilitates. You must generate first. And there isn't enough generation going on. The generation is even being frustrated. So as long as we can't generate, there's nothing to distribute. And there's nothing any transformer will do. So there's a lot of communication that we all need to do, and more knowledge that needs to be out there in the public to start with. So that's why I agree with the chairman that said the whole process is more political than economics. But the political machinery has to now change in a way that educates the public better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shubodu. So we are now ready to listen to the video stream. Mr. Kumar is ready for us. So Mr. Kumar, please just proceed and speak to the subject. Thank you.
Good morning to all the delegates at the Annual Economic Summit. It's indeed a technological marvel that from miles away I'm able to speak and you're perhaps able to see me. Let me very quickly move on to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk about the transition issues when especially the public-owned enterprises are moved to private sector or into any public-private partnerships. And I want to give some of the experiences that we have had in the Indian context. And I'm sure, having personally been associated some few years back, I remember in 2004 spending about a week's time in Abuja where we looked at the option of privatization of some of the distribution companies. And I distinctly recall meeting all the CEOs of 11 companies at that time. So having moved on, I must compliment the government, the regulators in Nigeria to have really gone for a mass-scale conversion from public-owned enterprises to public-private partnerships or private sector enterprises. So today's presentation, I hope you are able to see it on your screen as I move, that it's showing up properly on your side. If you see the presentation structure for the day, it's to suggest that I'm going to cover the following. I have a little bit of difficulty because I can't see the audience, nor can I see any of the people present there at the conference. So I'm assuming that it's being received properly at your end. So this is the structure of the presentation for today. And without going into the details of the same, let me move on to the first slide, which is setting the context. If you look at the slide, the power sector typically world over have a vicious circle. And there are challenges in the power sector, particularly in some of the countries like India or including some of the African countries, some of the South Asian countries, where the utilities are financially unviable. They are unhealthy today for the reasons that for a long time, electricity has been taken as a subject which is not like any other commodity, where people have to pay for it. One, by design, many of the electricity, most of us actually collect for electricity after it's been consumed. Though it is an ongoing and a going concern concept, but one isn't very sure whether you will get paid for it. It just depends on the customer, and then therefore you have to adapt the longish methodology of disconnections, etc. The other problems, of course, is the fact that it makes the entire cycle unviable, because if the distribution is unviable, the entire sector tends to become sick. And that's been the experience that many utilities in the developing worlds are facing. There is therefore a consequence that you have poor consumer satisfaction. There are phenomena like brownouts, blackouts, and unreliable quality of supply. And therefore, one needs to improve and ensure that we move from this vicious circle of unsustainable operations to something which can be more sustainable. And that's possible to be done through reforms. Now, I don't mean to talk refrigeration to Eskimos, but at the same time, it is important to express the fact that there is a challenge that many of the utilities are living with. And therefore, it is important to talk about reforms. It is important to look at what options would help us ultimately to go in and improve things for the customers. And naturally, all of this has to be first seen vis-a-vis the customer as the first choice. And then we have to look at the options of how it improves stuff for other stakeholders like government, regulators, and the companies themselves. It is therefore important that we have to look at how investment can be done in the networks, how investment can improve the commercial domain, how can we reduce the acronym that's been used here is aggregate, technical, commercial, and collection losses. And that's an acronym which was propounded in India. And let me step back and say why this long acronym and why not the old acronym of technical and distribution losses. It is because of the fact that whatever we may do, there were methods by virtue of the engineers, the managers, and the executives managed to show losses which were on ground reality actually much more higher as they will impact the P&L. So the P&L never used to match the corresponding T&D number and corresponding loss number. And therefore this acronym was coined to suggest that all losses, be on account of collection, be on account of having not billed, be on account of theft, be on account of any reason whatsoever, caused by utility to have not earned the revenue that it needs to earn, will be put as a part of the loss. And therefore, it's been a very satisfactory evolution, having used this acronym and having used this concept in monitoring the losses. And that's a very big learning that we did. And of course, the reform should aim at customer satisfaction. As I said, customer should be the focal point of delivery for everything that we tend to do. So having coined this concept, what is the way that one would like to work on this vicious circle? We need to move towards sustenance. And what are the options that we have? That we could cause retail tariff shocks. We could have the government's support to the sector. But both of these options are not the great options to pursue. These are just merely quick fixes which will not be sustainable on a long-term basis. And therefore, one has to actually look towards working to reduce the cost of distribution. More important part in the countries where the losses are a menace, to reduce the losses and to reduce ultimately also the sourcing of power, become more viable, become more creditworthy, and therefore then look for options of how to reduce the cost of power procurement. Now, considering this, the reform process must very clearly have discernible, measurable factors by virtue of which one would be able to achieve these efficiencies and ultimately service the customers. Now, some of the examples of this we saw in Delhi, where you have, at least Nigeria has adapted some of the learnings of Delhi, and I'm glad today we are able to present that to you. The 4 cogwheels of seamless transition includes making sure that we have the financial prudence that we exercise in this entire transition process. We look at how government needs to be a significant player. How would it provide the support to this whole process of reforms? And as we all know as practitioners, that no distribution reform process can succeed without a very serious engagement of the government. Whatever you do, government may actually offload the entire equity or have partnership. But more important part is, none of the reforms can succeed without government's direct support of the process, and including the oversight, which is very important from the customer's perspective. The other is, of course, to create a conducive regulatory environment which is more predictable, which actually mitigates the risk, because today's system, many of the people in the utility business would know, regulatory risk is a large risk which, if not being predictable, if not being very clear, can create issues. Now, while these 3, as you know, are the key enablers to reforms, the important internal inclusive process to the team that has to do in terms of its own action is the change management process. And that's a very significant part of this entire process to ensure success. And a holistic approach across all these cogwheels of seamless transition is important for us to internalize and important for all stakeholders to participate in this process. Moving on to the 4 cogwheels, I am going to take you through very clearly some of the concepts that were practiced or that are still practiced in the reform process as we see happening in India. One is that since many of